One.
Good morning. My name is Reverend Jerry Moore, and today I would like to talk about the community of Cassadaga. And not just about the community of Cassadaga, but the what, the how, the why of Cassadaga as a community. And of course, we'll begin with the what, and eventually we're going to get to the how and the why. And that's where I would like each of you to hopefully put in your 2 cents worth and give your opinion. The what begins with things that many of you probably already know about Cassadaga. When someone first visits Cassadaga for the first time, they experience the what, and you might be one of those people with us today as your first time visit. Oftentimes, someone who first gets here is very curious about this place. The architecture of the buildings is quite different than most of the houses that we find in Central Florida. They have the steep pitched roofs. They have the metal roofs. They're wooden, which is not covered over with stucco like so many of the homes that are here in Central Florida. And in addition to the physical appearance of the camp, of course, we have all of the people practicing these strange procedures of talking with people that have already passed over. It's really kind of unusual to find that many people doing all of that in one place. Of course, overall, we have the history of the camp expressed by the story of George Colby coming down in 1875, guided by his spirit guide, Seneca, and he waited some 10 years before he actually gave the land to a group of spiritualists that wanted to form the camp. So he's a very patient man. Today we have some 45 houses that are occupied by residents, and of course we have many members who live in the surrounding communities of Central Florida. But what makes this a community? What causes people to join together for a community? What causes them to feel that they're part of a group? So what just exactly is that? Well, there are many types and sizes of communities. In a general sense, a community does not have to be associated with a physical place or location like we have. You've probably heard people talk about ethnic communities, academic communities, online communities, or the so-called Gator Nation or Seminole Nation. I'm sure you have seen that in papers as well as had discussions with friends about this. So each of these bring to mind a group of people who have something in common, a bond that holds them together, even if, like the Gator Nation, it's just on a Saturday afternoon for the duration of a ball game. In this sense, each of us belongs to multiple communities at the same time. We belong to the community of alumni of the colleges that we attended, the high schools and grade schools we attended, the communities of towns or states that we once lived in, the community of all parents, if you have children, of all married people, of all people who have been divorced or are currently single, many communities that we belong to. So we have all of these overlapping layers from our past and of our present of the communities that we belong to. And this creates memories of what it was like in the times that we experienced that are similar to those of others who had this similar experience. And those memories can affect how we respond to a situation that we encounter. For example, for the first time someone walks through the doors of Colby Temple, it might bring to mind past experiences of going to another church that you attended perhaps when you were a child. The arrangement of the chairs, the lectern, the songs that are being sung, all can affect our experience and how we perceive the current moment because we relate them to something that happened in the past. We compare. We try to identify similarities and differences. We make judgments about whether we like the old better than the new or the new better than the old. And all of this happens usually very quickly, and many times we don't even realize that we're doing it. It just becomes part of our impression of the place. Some communities, we become members automatically. If you're an alumnus of a school, you are automatically part of that community. Other communities we choose to join. When we choose to join a community, we have taken a particular deliberate step. Many times that first step means that you have to access more information about the community. You end up getting a newsletter, you go to meetings, you interact with other members, you have communication and the exchange of ideas with others that have a similar interest in that community. And with that joining and added communication usually comes a sense of belonging and sharing something larger than ourselves. We are associating with others who have a common interest and goals, and we develop a common passion and emotional bond to the organization. There was a French writer, and I'm going to butcher his name, but Antoine Saint-Exupéry, who's the author of The Little Prince, wrote about love in the same vein. He said, "Love does not consist of gazing at each other, but in looking together in the same direction." And once that happens, usually another step follows, the sharing of resources with the community. By resources, I mean more than money. Resources includes our time, our expertise, our general participation in the activities of that community. We give up these things willingly. For many, the intention is simply to add to the community, to make it greater in some way, to give back for what they have received. For others, the participation may be tied to hope of recognition or even compensation. In any case, it is an ideal to recognize, the idea is to recognize and appreciate participation of all those who are giving their time and energy to the community, no matter how small or seemingly insignificant the act. What is interesting to observe is the passion and intent applied by the giver, no matter if the giver is someone else or it is ourselves. I think all of us have experienced a time when we were disappointed because we worked very hard on a project for an organization and did not receive the recognition we thought we deserved. Not a thank you, not a job well done, nothing. So the question I would suggest for us to answer is, why did we do the work in the first place? Was it to get the recognition or benefit the organization? What really was the intention? Taking a hard look at yourself is not always easy, especially when we don't necessarily like the answer that comes. When it comes to communities we join, some join together for a task. They have a specific reason to join together. Music groups and sports teams would be examples of that. Other communities are relational, as opposed to being task-oriented. Gatherings of class reunions or social clubs would be examples of that. These people join these groups to interact with others. Some groups even live together to make the job easier. And here, for this place, our founding fathers joined together to begin Cassadaga as a community for both purposes, both task and relational. They obtained the land, they gathered speakers, they erected tents, and eventually buildings. It was a task-oriented community to begin with. Not everyone was a medium. In fact, most of the original signers of the Articles of Incorporation were not mediums. They simply believed in the goals of the association and wished to participate. Surprisingly to some is the fact that George Colby donated the land, but was not on the board of trustees, nor was he a signer of the original charter. We each have a relationship with each other as well as with ourselves. Another reason for community is to support each other for the challenges of the inward journey. One of the greatest attractions of a community like Cassadaga is to join with others of a like mind. Others who have started the path of spiritual expansion and understanding before us. Learning and exchanging ideas from others gives us a springboard for our own advancement. There are many teachers and developmental circles offered year-round in the camp. Some of the attendees will eventually decide to begin their mediumship studies or studies to become healers. Others will simply learn all they can from the experience of the classes. Of course, Cassadaga is not the only religious community in the country. There are many religious communities throughout the United States. Amish communities, Mormon communities, Catholic, as well as other spiritualist communities. Each has its own unique features. Each has its own history and set of traditions. Joining the community like Cassadaga means to join the traditions and history of that community. It has been said that tradition is the wisdom of the past, the beauty of the past. Tradition is flawed, of course, like all human products are, but to separate oneself from community and tradition on one's spiritual journey is like turning one's back on a banquet right in front of you and deciding to go and forage for food by yourself. That's a quote from Dr. Marcus Borrow. Living in community like Cassadaga allows you to share and learn from those around you on a daily basis. So often in modern life, we are isolated from each other. We do not know our neighbors. We do not know our coworkers. We are newcomers to our community since we moved here from somewhere else. There is a teaching of the Essenes that lived in the Middle East back in the early days. And in their community, it was a community of equals. Someone who saw a need, like building a wall, and they had a few extra minutes, they would contribute to it. And when they were done, they were done. Even though the wall wasn't finished, it was for someone else to participate on their own. Today, we tend to delegate. We tend to assign tasks that need to be done for the community to a particular entity. We have some sort of governmental structure of the community. But we do get to be around like-minded people to gain insights and inspiration, comfort, assurance. We share experiences and camaraderie, our understanding and knowledge. The power of community gives us the power and the potential to see ourselves in the community at large. It gives us the ability to grow, to unfold, to bloom and add to the whole, to make our own contributions. Ideally, volunteers are honored and respected, given direction and guidance and the tools to be effective, but also the ability to exchange their own ideas, to innovate, to grow, to participate, and to add to the overall community. Each individual can make a difference in the overall development of the community. The intent is to honor and learn from the past while planning for the future and blending the two. For the individual, it is the ability to satisfy your own desires as well as the needs of the community. There is a give and take between the two. It gives the individual the joy of participation and passion. The community gains from that participation. Individuals can decide when they become dissatisfied that maybe they aren't getting out of that relationship what they intend. They have the ability to withdraw or withhold the resources that they otherwise would provide. The choice of the individual may depend on your intention for participating. Is it that you are trying to add to the community, or is it because you have your own particular things that you're trying to accomplish? There are, of course, external rewards and feedback from others that are derived by the individual, and there are internal rewards, the sense of accomplishment and the ability to express altruistic views. It's all about the care and feeding of the individual spirit, the reinforcement of our intention that we feed within ourselves as we interact within the community. Community is combining and interacting with others at its heart. You choose at what level, what degree of interaction, and how much passion that you bring to the tasks at hand. The question is, does that passion, does that intent, does that purpose blend and match the purpose of the group? And that brings us to the question of what exactly is the purpose of Cassadaga? This is where we turn from the what to turning our attention to the how of how we approach this idea of community. How do we put these ideas of the founders into action? A little bit of review might help to understand what the original founders were encountering. Our Cassadaga history reflects the history of spiritualism and the environment at the time. In 1848, I'm sure many of you remember that was the year that the Fox Sister rappings took place and was the advent of modern spiritualism. That started a huge wave of enthusiasm that we refer to as the spiritualist movement. It included many facets, including itinerant mediums traveling from town to town who gave talks as well as demonstrations. There was an upswell of support within the spiritualist movement for abolitionism and women's rights issues. And there was a general recognition that spiritual and divine knowledge was discoverable and knowable by individuals themselves instead of being handed down by church elders. There was no central person in the spiritualist movement. There was no central church, no organizational structure during those early 20, 30, 40 years. But the ideas that I just mentioned spread across the country very quickly under the umbrella of the spiritualist movement. That began in 1848. Beginning in the 1880s, there were several attempts to create a national organization, but they failed each time. It wasn't until 1893 when the National Spiritualist Association was finally created at a national meeting in Chicago. The very next year, 1894, was the year that Cassadaga was founded. That's 46 years after the Hydeville rappings. This was right in the middle of the Gilded Age. In the years since the Civil War ended in 1865 was a period of rapid industrialization for our country. There was a movement of people from being on farms to mostly living on farms to mostly living in the city during that 30 years. The economy literally doubled in size. Our country produced more steel than the combination of Britain and Germany combined. It was a huge sea change in the social fabric of the country. It was also an age of new inventions and discoveries. Learning and new ideas were spreading, not just with spiritualism, but there was Darwinism, theories that incorporated, the telegraph, the telephone, railroads crisscrossed the country. It was relatively easy to move from one place to another using these railroads that had some 70,000 miles of track by that time. It was huge. So this was the environment. It was an age of anything was possible because science was leading the charge and everybody thought that everything was knowable and everything was ever expanding in a very progressive manner. In the camp, the original Articles of Incorporation have 5 objects when this was written, and they were, number 1, to provide for, maintain, and hold assemblages or meetings for literary, scientific, philosophical, moral, and religious instruction. That was the first objective on the list of objectives. It reflected this idea of expansion of ideas, of spreading the word. The second objective was to encourage the establishment of schools and libraries and sanitariums. The idea was to form an organization that would then become the seed to form other organizations in order to keep the momentum going. To ordain and license ministers. To encourage the establishing of branch camps on the Atlantic and Gulf coasts of Florida and other desirable locations. And finally, especially to teach the spiritualistic doctrines of its immortality of the soul and the nearness of the spirit world, the guardianship of spirit friends, and the possibility of communion with them. The idea was that this knowledge, one way to understand this knowledge was through spirit, to understand the overall impact of it and to spread these ideas and have a place to spread these ideas. These were and are still the objectives of our association. They reflect the idea of constantly learning and expanding and exploring and sharing what we have found out so far. Look at this from the community perspective and the dynamics of the individual. Respect for being a member of the community. Everyone can contribute because everyone can be a source of knowledge. Everyone can have an understanding that they can then share with others. Here, members of the Board of Trustees are members at large, just like any other member, and volunteers, just like any other volunteer. Members of the Board of Trustees just wear an additional hat. No member of the Board of Trustees is necessarily greater than any other member. That means people who are members are just as important as any member who serves as a trustee. Trustees are not more than, and members are not less than. Everyone who serves the camp is valuable to the camp and is to be respected equally. We wish to foster a cooperative environment, and every challenge is seen as an opportunity. That doesn't mean that we are conflict-free. It doesn't mean that we're going to be a completely peaceful community. When you think about it, that would actually be a little bit boring. If everything's the same, everything is static, everything remains, then there's no excitement. There is no challenge to try and find something better. If we expect perfection and have a picture of it, then we have a problem. Chaos is required, at least in a small amount, in order to allow the energies of change to take hold. Thomas Edison, tried many times to create the light bulb. When he was asked about it, he said, "I did not fail 10,000 times. Instead, I learned 10,000 things that did not work." He was willing to expand. He was willing to play with many ideas. Our intent is to encourage everyone to not focus on learning a topic. Rather, it is more valuable to learn how to learn. Learn how to absorb new information, evaluate it, consider its positives and negatives, and what to keep and what to discard. Learning how to learn becomes the golden goose that lays the golden eggs. Learning never stops. A single topic can become old and stale and no longer usable as times change. The community needs to be self-perpetuating. It requires adapting to changes in resources, in members, with energy flowing in and out. New members provide new blood, new ideas, and new perspectives that can be incorporated. When you join, you participate, you gain a sense of community. Each member is a resource and can express concerns and be part of the solution. We are the camp, and the camp is us. Having enjoyed these fruits of those who've come before us, it is now our turn to contribute and work for the continuance of the association, for the generations after us. I don't know if you were ever in the Boy Scouts or the Girl Scouts, but there was a mantra that was always taught to me, and that is, you always leave the campsite better than you found it. And that's essentially what we want to do here. We want to prepare the association for the future so that others will have the same sense of wonder and amazement that such a magical place even exists. And this starts with the commitment to the community. Cassadaga is a spiritualist community. So what is spiritualism? You probably have your own ideas on this based on whatever your experience has been here. But there are certain, guidelines that many of us go by. You've probably heard the phrase that we have no dogma. No one is saying that we have the only way to learn or understand. We do not have a central leader as a founder, as I mentioned earlier. No one person who had the knowledge which they presented to the world as spiritualism. There is no proclamation that we have found that the only pathway to enlightenment is such and so, and here it is, and you must follow this particular pathways. All other pathways are wrong. We do not do that. On the contrary, spiritualism is based on the notion that each person not only has the ability, but also has the responsibility to learn spiritual truth themselves. This requires personal observance and thoughtful reflection, listening and evaluating the ideas of others while comparing on your own understanding so that you can be open to more refined and thorough comprehension, and putting that understanding you have into practice. I said about trying to, as our central document, we have the Declaration of Principles. I think most of you are familiar with that. We recite it during church services every Sunday and at other times. And it has become the central document of what we hold to be true up to this time. But there are certain other practices that tend to be used here in Cassadaga, and this is just observance on my part that I'm about to read to you. And I'd like to get your response about these, how we implement this. There are many commonly held practices. These are not official. Our primary set of beliefs and philosophy are contained in the Declaration of Principles. In this statement, we supplement the Declaration, and here's the context. The Declaration of Principles themselves were first created in 1899. That was what would that be, 5 years after Cassadaga was formed, or actually, and the first 6 principles were accepted by the National Spiritualist Association at that time. But that wasn't static. Another 2 principles were added about 10 years later in 1909. Principle number 9 was added in 1944. It was revised in 1983 and again in 1998. Principle 8 was revised in 2001, and Principle 6 was revised in 2004. I go through that because it wasn't like it was just handed down and this is it, this is the end of it. It's been revised on several occasions over time. As we find out new information or we want to make a refinement in the wording based on what is understood at that time. If you read the Declaration of Principles, you will notice they begin as either we believe or we affirm. And those words are chosen deliberately. Affirm indicates that it's a piece of knowledge that we think is true. We think that there's enough evidence that there is no doubt about it. Believe means there's a preponderance of evidence. We believe this is the case, but we're open to it being adjusted. Those words were chosen very deliberately. So the next time that you read the Declaration of Principles, pay attention. Take a look at it. It's very interesting how that's come to evolve and is expected to evolve in the future. We're not done. That's the whole point of spiritualism. We're not done. We're in the middle of learning. We're in the middle of gathering evidence. We're in the middle of evaluating that. As new evidence comes in, we'll make more changes. So that's the gist of the Declaration of Principles. Now, when it comes to our charter, with the objectives I just read to you, you know that spiritualism is described not just as a religion, but also as a philosophy and a science. And that's because we think that all of those play a role. All of those are a way of applying the principles and living them from a day-to-day standpoint. Here in Cassadaga, we believe in treating all people as equals and with respect. We adhere to the standard practices of describing our services that we offer clearly and accurately, of stating the fees charged before a service is performed, of respecting the confidential nature of the information exchanged between the practitioner and the client, of dealing honestly in all interactions with a client, and never engaging in fakery or fraud. We do not believe in proselytizing others to spiritualism. But the reverse is also true. We do not believe that others should proselytize spiritualists to their religion or their belief system. We do not believe in vicarious atonement. That's kind of a fancy term there, where we believe someone else can take on a responsibility for our own actions, that we can transfer that responsibility. It is our responsibility. If we thought it, if we said it, if we did it, it's ours. We own that automatically. We can't just say someone else takes responsibility for my life. We're responsibility for what we do in our own lives. We do not adhere to or endorse belief systems or practices that interfere with a person's ability to make their own decisions or affect their mental self-control, which includes the use of mind-altering practices such as hypnosis, the usage of drugs or other ingested or injected substances. We do not believe to have as its object to use, influence, or affect another person in a negative way. We do not believe in creating or increasing fear. We do not believe in harming or impairing other human beings or living things. We do not act as doctors or prescribe medications or treatment. We do not perform psychic surgery or animal sacrifice, and we do not predict death. Now, other spiritualist communities have different viewpoints on all of these things I just said. You will find that if you travel around, that there are variations from here and there. But here in Casadega, as a broad statement, these are the things that we put into practice. This is the how of taking what's in the Declaration of Principles and taking the ideas of spiritualism and putting them into practice as a philosophy. Well, that takes us to the why. We've talked about what, we've talked about how. Let's talk about why. This is actually probably the most important one, because why do we do what we do? That's a question not just for the community at large, but it's also a question for each of us individually. It's an important question to both ask and answer. If you do not know why, then it will be easy for us to become discouraged and maybe quit after our first disappointment or difficulty. If we do not know why, then our efforts will not have meaning. What we do here will just become some experience we had at some point in our lives. Knowing the why is what gives us energy. It gives us enthusiasm. It gives us a reason to get up every morning with curiosity and anticipation. It gives us the endurance when the going gets more difficult. The why gives us our reason to continue. The why reinforces and sustains our sense of community. When it comes to our founders, we have relatively little information about what would qualify as the why of what they did to create this place. In the case of George Colby, we do have the story that he received spirit communication for most of his life, and he had been told by his spirit guide, Seneca, of what to expect and what to do. He traveled down the St. Johns River to this place as he was directed. He searched through the woods until he found it, and he claimed it in 1875 when this was a wild place. And then he waited 11 years, or 9 years, I guess it is, to find out when it was time to, when others came down and it was time to give the land to the new organization that was being formed. George was a medium. He received his guidance from spirit. But most of the signers of the articles were not mediums. They did not have that direct guidance. I think the biggest why for them is contained in the Articles of Incorporation. As I already mentioned, the first clause really embodies the real spirit here. It reminds me of TED Talks. I think many of you might be familiar with those. They're available on YouTube. Technology, Education, and Design. Their motto is ideas worth spreading. And I suggest to you that that same motto could apply to Cassadaga. That's the wave of what spiritualism was all about. They wanted to create this refuge where the new ideas and proposals would have a home, where great speakers and learned people could come and speak freely. These were very progressive people for their time. They were for women's rights. They were for improving the condition of factory workers, for the expansion of science and schools. Listen to these words once again. The very first objective was to provide for, maintain, and hold assemblages or meetings for literary, scientific, philosophical, moral, and religious instruction. They wanted to spread the ideas. They wanted to learn about learning. They were engaged. They wanted everybody else to be as engaged as they were, and they needed a place to do it. They needed to have a refuge that was safe to talk about these radical ideas, where they could say things that were outrageous for the times, but would still be received by the people in the audience as being something worth evaluating. And of course, they finished the objectives to especially teach the spiritualistic doctrines of immortality of the soul, the nearness of spirit world, the guardianship of spirit friends, and the possibility of communion with them, because they wanted to convey hope. The hope for a better world. The hope that it doesn't end when our life on this plane ends. There is more to it. And we can continue, not just on this plane and expand, but on the next as well. The two bookends of the Articles of Incorporation. Spread it on this plane and learn about the next plane. The founders of Cassadaga, the why was to provide this physical place where an ever-expanding exploration of these new ideas of all types could take place and be conveyed to the world, to bring that fulfillment of our greatest potentials as well as the hope. What better why could there possibly be? What bigger idea is there? I hope that you find your why in this place. There are many pathways, there are many classes, there are many speakers coming from different angles, and all of them come from this same aspect of raising the bar for all of us. And for all of us, as the saying goes, as the tide rises, we all rise. We can bring each other up, and despite what is going on in the world, we can find that hope and fulfillment in a place like this. So, thank you.